The crimson storms of Zarian 7 had been raging for 3,000 years, and yet the Vorthic Council chamber stood unbroken among the chaos. Inside the crystalline walls, beings that would make nightmares flee in terror gathered around a table, made from compressed starlight. These were the rulers of the Deathworld Council, and today they faced something they had never encountered before. Curiosity about a species they considered beneath their notice. Gorth flexed his 6 arms as he studied the holographic display floating above the table. His species, the Hrex, had evolved on a world where gravity could crush diamonds and the atmosphere was thick enough to swim through. Standing 12 feet tall with skin like living metal, he was considered small by his people's standards. These creatures call themselves humans, he said, his voice like grinding stone. They live on a world so soft that water falls from the sky. The Vorthak representative, a being of living crystal named Zeth, pulsed with colors that would blind most species. Her people had adapted to survive in the hearts of dying stars, feeding on radiation that would cook lesser beings in seconds. Soft worlds breed soft creatures, she said, her voice like singing glass. Why do we waste time discussing them? At the head of the table sat Vex 9, the council chairman. His species, the Neth, existed partially in this dimension and partially in others. To look at him directly was to see a constantly shifting shadow that hurt the mind. He had lived for over 10,000 years, conquering worlds and bending entire species to his will. Because, he said, his voice echoing from everywhere and nowhere, our scouts report something interesting about these humans. The display changed, showing images of Earth and its inhabitants. The council members saw a blue and green world where the deadliest predators were barely the size of a Hrex child. They saw humans pink and hairless, with no natural weapons and skin so thin it could be cut by their own fingernails. Most amusing of all, they saw human cities where millions lived in peace, protected by nothing more than metal and stone. They fight wars, the scout reported, his voice trembling slightly. Even as a member of the warrior caste of the Vex race, he found the council's presence overwhelming. But not for survival. They fight for ideas, for resources, for territory. They have weapons that can destroy their own world, yet they choose restraint. Gorth laughed, a sound like breaking boulders. Restraint? They are simply too weak to use their own weapons properly. Perhaps, Vex 9 mused, but our psychological analysis suggests something else. They adapt. Put a human in a desert, and within generations his descendants will thrive there. Put them in the frozen wastes, and they will build cities. Put them in the sky, and they will learn to fly. Zeth's crystalline form brightened with amusement. You speak of them as if they were a threat. They have not even learned to travel between stars without mechanical aid. Which is why, Vex 9 continued, I propose we invite them to join our council. The chamber fell silent. For a moment, even the eternal storms of Zarian 7 seemed to pause. The Deathworld Council had never extended membership to a species that had not conquered at least 50 worlds and survived the trial of absolute destruction. Their members were the apex predators of the galaxy, beings so deadly that entire sectors fled at the mention of their names. You cannot be serious, Gorth said, his metal skin clanking as he shifted. They would not survive a single day in our presence. Exactly, Vex 9 replied, and now his voice carried the hint of cruel pleasure. Imagine the amusement. We extend our hand in friendship to these soft creatures, and they accept, believing they have achieved something great. We watch them struggle, fail, and break. Their despair will be exquisite. Zeth's form pulsed with interest. A psychological experiment, how delightfully cruel. More than that, Vex 9 said. We demonstrate our superiority to the galaxy. When these humans inevitably fail and flee, crying for mercy, every other species will understand that the Council's dominance is absolute. None can stand among us. The scout shifted nervously. Chairman, there is one more thing. The humans have a saying, when you gaze into the abyss gazes back. Their philosophers seem to understand that confronting the darkness changes you. Gorth waved one of his massive hands dismissively. Pretty words from a species that has never faced true darkness. We are the abyss, and we have gazed upon countless civilizations. They all break the same way. Then it is decided, Vex 9 announced. We will extend an invitation to humanity. One representative to begin with. Let them send their finest diplomat, their greatest warrior, their most brilliant mind. It will not matter. They will serve as entertainment until we grow bored. The council voted unanimously. The message was prepared, encrypted in frequencies that would challenge human science but not overwhelm it. They wanted humanity to succeed in decoding it, after all. The invitation was formal, written in 17 languages, and presented as a great honor on Earth. The message caused chaos. Governments fell as nations argued over who would represent humanity. Scientists worked around the clock to decode the full meaning. Military leaders prepared for war, certain this was some elaborate trap. But in the end, cooler heads prevailed. Ambassador David Cross received the assignment not because he was the strongest or the smartest, but because he was the most adaptable. He had served in deserts and jungles, in Arctic conditions and tropical storms. He spoke 12 languages and had successfully negotiated peace between enemies who had been fighting for generations. Most importantly, he had the one quality that would prove essential. He genuinely believed that any problem could be solved if you were willing to understand it. As his ship approached station terminus, the council's mobile headquarters, Cross, reviewed the files one more time. The beings he was about to meet were legends of destruction, creatures that had turned entire star systems into graveyards. They were offering humanity a chance to join them, and Cross intended to make the most of it. He had no idea that he was walking into a trap designed to break him. But perhaps more importantly, the council had no idea that they were about to encounter something they had never faced before, a species that got stronger under pressure, that found opportunity in adversity, and that refused to accept that any problem was truly unsolvable. The stage was set for a confrontation that would reshape the galaxy, and neither side fully understood what they were about to unleash. The docking bay of Station Terminus existed in 7 dimensions simultaneously, which made walking through it feel like trying to move through liquid metal while being pressed by invisible weights. Ambassador David Cross felt his inner ear screaming in protest as gravity shifted directions every few steps, but he kept walking. His human physiology was not designed for this environment, and the council knew it. They watched from hidden alcoves as Cross stumbled, caught himself, and continued forward. Zeth's crystalline form pulsed with amusement as she observed the human's breathing apparatus, a crude device he had assembled from emergency supplies during the journey. "Look how he struggles," she transmitted to the others. "His species cannot even process our station's atmosphere." But Gorth was not laughing. His warrior instincts, honed by centuries of battle, detected something troubling in the human's movements. Cross was not just surviving the hostile environment, he was adapting to it. Each step was more confident than the last. When gravity reversed, Cross used the momentum to push himself forward. When the dimensional shifts threatened to tear him apart, Cross found the stable points by watching how the station's own lights bent around them. "Welcome, human." Vex 9 materialized in front of Cross, his shifting form deliberately intimidating. "I'm surprised you made it this far. Most species require environmental suits to survive our hospitality." Cross smiled, though his face was pale from the strain. "Thank you for the warm welcome. I apologize for the breathing apparatus, but I did not want to insult your station's atmosphere by collapsing in it." The response surprised the council members. They had expected fear, submission, or desperate bravado. Instead, Cross treated the hostile environment as if it were a minor inconvenience, something to be worked around rather than conquered. "You will need to prove your worthiness," Gorth announced, stepping forward. His 12-foot frame cast a shadow that seemed to absorb light. "On my world, we settle disputes through tests of strength. Face me in combat and show us what humanity offers." Cross looked up at the massive alien, then at the assembled council members. He could feel their expectations, their certainty that he would either refuse or be crushed, Instead, he nodded. I accept your challenge. However, I propose we make it interesting? Interesting? Gorth's metal skin clanked as he shifted. You think to dictate terms to me? Not dictate, Cross replied. Negotiate. You want to test human strength against Rex strength. But strength has many forms. I suggest we test adaptability instead. Before Gorth could respond, Cross continued. Choose the environment. Make it as hostile as you like. But instead of fighting each other, we compete to see who can accomplish a task in that environment. The winner is not the one who destroys the other, but the one who succeeds despite the obstacles. Zeth's form brightened. Clever, he seeks to avoid direct confrontation. Perhaps, Vex9 said, but let us see how cleverness serves him. Gorth, choose your environment. The Rex commander thought for a moment, then smiled with predatory satisfaction. The flux chamber. Gravity shifts every 30 seconds. Atmosphere alternates between toxic and corrosive. Temperature ranges from absolute zero to molten metal. The task is simple. Retrieve a data crystal from the center of the chamber and return it here. And if we both succeed? Cross asked. Impossible. Gorth replied. No being has ever survived the flux chamber long enough to complete the task. I will prove that even among Deathworld species, the Rex are supreme. The council gathered to watch as both competitors entered the chamber. Cross had discarded his breathing apparatus, instead wrapping his face with cloth torn from his uniform. He moved carefully, testing each step. While Gorth charged forward with brute force, the first gravity shift caught Cross off guard, slamming him against the wall. But instead of fighting the change, he used it, pushing off the wall as gravity. Reversed again. When the atmosphere turned toxic, he held his breath and moved quickly. When it became corrosive, he used his saliva to neutralize small amounts of the gas around his improvised mask. Gorth, meanwhile, relied on his species' natural resistance to hostile environments. His metal skin protected him from most of the chamber's attacks, and his massive strength let him muscle through the gravity shifts. He reached the center first, claiming the data crystal, but on the return journey, something went wrong. The chamber's systems, designed to challenge even Deathworld species, began to malfunction. The gravity shifts became erratic, the temperature swings more extreme. Gorth found himself trapped as the floor became molten beneath his feet. Cross saw the Rex warrior's predicament and made a choice that stunned the watching council. Instead of taking advantage of his opponent's trouble, he changed course. Using a combination of timing and leverage, Cross managed to reach Gorth's position. He could not lift the massive alien, but he could redirect the gravity shifts by activating emergency stabilizers. He had noticed during his careful observation of the chamber. Together, they escaped the flux chamber. Gorth carried the data crystal, but Cross had saved both their lives. Why? Gorth asked as they stood in the observation deck, both breathing heavily. You could have won. Because, Cross replied, winning by watching someone else die is not winning, it is just surviving. My species learned long ago that we are stronger together than apart. The council members exchanged glances. This was not the outcome they had expected. The human had not been crushed by their challenge, nor had he succeeded through superior strength. Instead, he had changed the nature of the test itself. Impressive, Vex9 admitted. But this was only the first trial. We have prepared other tasks for you, human. Tasks that will test your limits. I look forward to them, Cross said. But I have a question for you. Speak. Why are you testing me? Your invitation suggested that humanity was being offered membership in the council, yet you treat me as if I must prove my worth. Either you believe my species has value, or you do not. Zeth's form pulsed with what might have been surprise. You question our methods? I question your motives, Cross replied calmly. In my experience, when someone offers you a gift but makes you work for it, they are not offering a gift at all. They are offering a transaction, so what do you really want from humanity? The question hung in the air like a challenge. The council, members, beings who had dominated the galaxy through fear and force, found themselves confronted by something they had not expected. A human who refused to be intimidated and who asked uncomfortable questions. Perhaps, Vex9 said slowly, we underestimated your species' capacity for insight. Perhaps, Cross agreed. But I prefer to think of it as our capacity for hope. We hope you are sincere about this invitation. We hope this is the beginning of a friendship that will benefit both our species, and we hope that our differences can become strengths rather than obstacles. As the council members retired to consider this unexpected development, none of them realized that they had just encountered something more dangerous than any Deathworld predator, a species that refused to accept that conflict was inevitable, that believed cooperation was possible, and that saw opportunity where others saw only threat. The human had passed their first test, but not in the way they had intended. And that, perhaps, was the most troubling development of all. 3 months had passed since Ambassador Cross first arrived at Station Terminus, and the council was beginning to realize they had made a terrible mistake. What had started as a cruel entertainment had become something far more dangerous. A successful integration. The human had not broken, had not fled, and worst of all, had not remained alone. Dr. Amy Park floated through the zero-gravity laboratory section of the station, her movements graceful despite the environment being designed for species with natural flight capabilities. She was studying Vorthic crystal technology, something that should have been impossible for a species that had not evolved in the hearts of dying stars. Yet somehow, she had not only understood the principles but had begun to improve upon them. This is remarkable, she said to Zeth, who had reluctantly agreed to supervise the human's work. Your people use crystalline matrices to store and channel energy, but you are only using about 30% of the crystal's potential. Zeth's form pulsed with irritation. Our technology has been perfected over millions of years. A species that still uses primitive metal tools cannot possibly improve upon it. But what if I showed you that you could store 3 times more energy in the same space? Amy asked, her voice filled with genuine excitement. Look at this. She activated a modified crystal matrix, one that she had restructured using principles of human engineering. The crystal blazed with light, channeling energy at levels that made even Zeth's radiation-adapted eyes hurt. But more than that, it was stable, efficient, and elegant. Impossible, Zeth whispered. How did you ... I applied thermodynamics principles that my species developed for our primitive metal tools, Amy replied with a smile. Sometimes a fresh perspective is all you need. In another section of the station, engineer Tom Bradley was having a similar conversation with a group of Neth technicians. The phase-shifting aliens had reluctantly allowed him to examine their dimensional anchor systems, expecting him to be driven mad by the nonlinear mathematics involved. Instead, Tom had created something that should not exist, a stable dimensional anchor that could be operated by single-dimension beings. The trick, he explained to the bewildered Neth, is not to fight the phase shifts but to work with them. Instead of trying to exist in all dimensions simultaneously, you create a resonance pattern that lets you choose which dimension to emphasize. The Neth engineer, a being called Wraith 7, flickered between dimensions as he examined Tom's work. This should not function. The mathematics are all wrong. Wrong by your standards, Tom agreed. But mathematics is just a language. Sometimes you need to speak a different dialect to solve a problem. But perhaps the most disturbing development was happening in the diplomatic quarters, where Rachel Stone was conducting what she called cultural exchange sessions. She had somehow convinced representatives from 6 different species to attend. Regular meetings where they discussed their problems and worked together on solutions. The Frex-Vorthic border dispute has been going on for 3,000 years, she explained to the assembled group. But you are both fighting over something that neither of you actually wants. Gorth's metal skin clanked as he shifted impatiently. The disputed zones contain valuable resources. My people need those resources. And my people need the energy sources found there, Zeth added, her crystalline form dimming with anger. But what if you both could have what you need? Rachel asked. Gorth, your people are skilled at mining and construction. Zeth, your people are experts at energy manipulation and storage. Why not work together? Because they are our enemies. Gorth replied, as if explaining something obvious to a child. No, Rachel said gently, they are your competitors. There is a difference. Enemies want to destroy each other. Competitors want to outperform each other. What if I told you that working together would let you both outperform your previous efforts? The idea was so radical that it took several minutes for the assembled aliens to process it. They had been raised on the principle that strength came from dominance, that resources were finite, and that cooperation was weakness. The human was suggesting that these fundamental truths might be wrong. You propose an alliance? Wraith 7 asked, his form flickering with uncertainty. I propose a partnership, Rachel replied. You pool your resources and skills to accomplish something none of you could do alone. The Frex provide the labor, the Vorthek provide the power, the Neth provide the transportation. Everyone benefits. Within weeks, the impossible had happened. The Frex and Vorthak had not only ended their 3,000-year war, but had begun joint mining operations in the disputed zones. The Neth, impressed by the efficiency of the new arrangement, had offered to transport goods between the two species. Territories. The Council watched these developments with growing alarm. VX9 called an emergency session in the deepest part of Station Terminus, where the reality distortions were so severe that even council members had difficulty maintaining their physical forms. This cannot continue, he announced, his voice echoing from multiple dimensions. The humans are disrupting the natural order. They are making friends, Gorth admitted, his usual confidence shaken. My own warriors ask why we fight the Vorthak when we could fight alongside them against greater threats. My people speak of efficiency improvements and collaborative research, Zeph added. They have forgotten that we are meant to be superior to lesser species. The other species are beginning to question our authority, Wraith 7 reported. They see what the humans have accomplished and wonder why they should serve us rather than work with us. Vex 9's form solidified into something approaching anger. Then we must remind them why they fear us. We will give the humans a test they cannot survive, a task so impossible that even their adaptability will fail them. What do you propose? Gorth asked. Ragnarok Prime? Vex 9 replied, and the words seemed to drain warmth from the chamber. A world so hostile that even we avoid it. The surface is constantly reshaped by seismic activity. Storms rage there that can melt our strongest metals. The native predators hunt in packs of thousands and have never known defeat. You want to send the humans to colonize Ragnarok Prime? Zeth's form pulsed with disbelief. That is not a test. That is execution. Exactly, Vex 9 said. We will present it as a great honor, a chance for humanity to prove itself worthy of full council membership. They will accept because they are too proud to refuse. And when they fail, when they die screaming in that hell world, the galaxy will remember why the council rules. But as the council made their plans, they failed to notice that the humans had been making plans of their own. Cross had not come to Station Terminus alone, nor had he come unprepared. Humanity had been watching, learning, and adapting, just as they always did. The council thought they were setting a trap. What they were actually doing was offering humanity the greatest opportunity in their species' history, a chance to prove that no world was too hostile to be called home, and that no challenge was too great to be overcome. The stage was set for a confrontation that would determine not just humanity's fate, but the future of the galaxy itself. The surface of Ragnarok Prime looked like the end of the universe having a bad day. The ground shifted and cracked as seismic forces tore the landscape apart every few hours. Storms of superheated metal rain hammered the twisted terrain while winds that could flip a starship howled across the broken plains. In the distance, pack hunters called Ravagers moved in groups of 300, their crystalline teeth glinting in the hellish light of the system's dying star. General Patricia Webb stood at the edge of the human landing zone, watching her people work with the focused intensity that had made her species legendary. She had volunteered to lead the Ragnarok Prime expedition when the Council made their offer, and she had brought with her the best that humanity had to offer: engineers, scientists, soldiers, and pioneers who saw impossibility as just another word for interesting. "Status report," she called to her second-in-command, Colonel Martinez. "The seismic sensors are online," Martinez replied, consulting his tablet. "Dr. Kim's team has mapped the stable zones. We have about 6 hours before the next major shift." Webb nodded. The Council had expected humanity to try to conquer Ragnarok Prime through force, to build structures that could withstand the planet's fury. Instead, the humans had done something the Council had never considered. They had learned to work with the planet instead of against it. "Underground City Alpha is ready for occupancy," Dr. Kim reported as he approached. "We found a cave system that remained stable during the seismic shifts. The natural rock formations actually channel the planet's energy in predictable patterns." "How predictable?" Webb asked. "Predictable enough that we can harvest it," Kim replied with a grin. "The geothermal taps are already online. We have more power than we know what to do with." This was the difference between humanity and the Council. Species, where the Frex would have tried to smash the planet into submission, where the Vorthak would have attempted to overpower its natural forces, and where the Neth would have tried to phase around its dangers, humans had studied Ragnarok Prime until they understood it. And once they understood it, they had found ways to make it work for them. "What about the metal storms?" Webb asked. "That was Engineer Thompson's breakthrough," Kim replied. "We are not trying to shelter from them. We are channeling them through a series of collection arrays. The storms are basically mining the planet's crust for us and delivering refined metals directly to our processing stations." Webb allowed herself a small smile. The Council had sent humanity to Ragnarok Prime to die. Instead, they were turning the Deathworld into the most efficient mining and energy production facility in the galaxy. "And the Ravagers?" she asked. This was the question that had worried her most. The Ravagers were the apex predators of Ragnarok Prime, creatures that had evolved to hunt in massive packs and had never known fear. They were intelligent, adaptable, and had destroyed every previous attempt at colonization. "That is where things get interesting," Martinez said. "Dr. Park's xenobiology team has been studying them. It turns out they are not just predators. They are social creatures with complex hierarchies and communication systems. Meaning they respond to social cues," Kim explained. "When our people approached them with respect instead of fear, when we offered cooperation instead of domination, they were curious rather than hostile." Webb stared at him. "You made friends with the most dangerous predators in the galaxy?" "Not friends exactly," Martinez corrected. "More like partners. They help us navigate the dangerous terrain, and we help them coordinate their hunts." It turns out that human pack tactics and Ravager pack tactics have a lot in common. The implications were staggering. The Council had sent humanity to face the ultimate test of Deathworld survival, and humanity had responded by creating the first successful interspecies partnership with a native apex predator species. "How long until the Council comes to check on our progress?" Webb asked. 3 days, Martinez replied. "Ambassador Cross sent word that they expect to find our bones scattered across the landscape. Then we had better give them a proper welcome." Webb said. When the Council delegation arrived at Ragnarok Prime, they came prepared for a funeral. Vex 9 had brought recording devices to capture the moment when they found the human colony's ruins, evidence of their species' inevitable failure. Gorth had come to retrieve any useful salvage from the wreckage. Zeth had come to study how quickly the planet's forces had overwhelmed human technology. Instead, they found a thriving colony that defied everything they thought they knew about Deathworld colonization. "This is impossible," Vex 9 said as their ship descended toward the landing pad. The pad itself was impossible, a stable platform built into the planet's shifting terrain. Around it, they could see the signs of human habitation, power lines that seemed to flex with the seismic shifts, buildings that appeared to be carved into the living rock, and most disturbing of all, groups of Ravagers moving in formation with human figures. "Welcome to Ragnarok Prime," General Webb said as she greeted the council delegation. Behind her, the human colony buzzed with activity. Humans and Ravagers worked side by side, the Predator's natural abilities complementing human ingenuity. "How? Are you alive?" Gorth asked, his metal skin clanking as he shifted nervously. Even his warrior instincts were telling him to flee from this place. "We listened to the planet," Webb replied. "Instead of fighting it, we learned to work with it. Instead of fearing the Ravagers, we learned to communicate with them. Instead of trying to impose our will on this world, we found ways to make it." "Our home?" Zeth's crystalline form pulsed with disbelief. "You have domesticated the apex predators of a Deathworld?" "We have formed a partnership," Webb corrected. "They are still apex predators, but now they are apex predators." The council members exchanged glances. This was beyond their worst nightmares. They had sent humanity to die on the most hostile world in the galaxy, and instead humanity had turned that world into an asset. "This changes nothing," Vex-9 declared, though his voice lacked its usual confidence. "One successful colony does not prove your species' worth. Then perhaps you should speak to the 17 other species that have requested human assistance with their own hostile worlds," Webb replied. "Or the mining consortium that wants to hire us to develop similar projects, or the research stations that want to study our methods." The truth was crushing in its simplicity. The council had intended to demonstrate humanity's weakness, but instead they had showcased humanity's greatest strength, the ability to find opportunity in adversity, to create cooperation where others saw only conflict, and to turn the impossible into the inevitable. "This is not over," Vex-9 warned, but even he knew the words were empty. The galaxy was watching, and they had seen what humanity could accomplish when given the chance. As the council delegation departed, Webb stood with her human and Ravager partners, watching the ship disappear into the storm-racked sky. She knew that everything was about to change, that the old order was crumbling, and that humanity would play a central role in whatever came next. The council had made their fatal error, and now they would have to live with the consequences. The alarm that shattered the peace of Station Terminus was not like any sound the council had heard before. It was the death cry of a civilization, transmitted across space by the last desperate survivors of the Kelmer system. The message was simple and terrifying. The Shethara had returned. For 10,000 years, the Cathara had been the nightmare that haunted the galaxy's dreams. They were an ancient species that had once ruled the stars until their hunger for conquest and their rigid caste system had driven them to civil war. The council had formed originally to stand against them, and their combined might had barely been enough to drive the Cathara into the dark spaces between galaxies. Now they were back, and they were not alone. The Cathara had spent their exile building an empire of enslaved species, twisted creatures that had been broken and remade into living weapons. Their fleets darkened the space around whole star systems, and their advance seemed unstoppable. "How many ships?" Vex-9 asked, his normally stable form flickering with anxiety. 12,000 in the first wave, reported the sensor technician, a nervous Vex whose voice trembled with fear. "Possibly twice that in reserve. And how many do we have?" Gorth demanded, his 6 arms clenching into fists. 4,000, Zeth replied, her crystalline form dimming. "Including the human vessels." The pause that followed was heavy with implications. The council had always maintained their dominance through superior force, but the Cathara had returned with numbers that even their combined might could not match. Worse, the Cathara had learned from their previous defeat. Their ships were faster, their weapons more powerful, and their tactics more sophisticated. "We need the humans," Wraith 7 said quietly, his form flickering between dimensions. "Their unconventional methods might give us an advantage." "We need everyone," Vex-9 corrected. "Send word to every species in the galaxy. This is not a council war. This is a survival war." The message that went out from Station Terminus was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. For the first time in their history, the Deathworld Council was not issuing commands or making demands. They were asking for help, the response surprised. Everyone, species that had never cooperated before, began forming alliances. The Frex and Vorthak, their partnership strengthened by human mediation, volunteered to lead joint strike forces. The Neth offered to coordinate transportation and logistics. And at the center of it all, humanity stepped forward with a proposal that would have seemed impossible just months before. "We do not fight the Cathara," Ambassador Cross announced at the emergency council session. "We convert them." The silence that followed was deafening. Even the station's background hum seemed to pause. "Convert them?" Vex 9 asked. "You mean capture them?" "No," Cross replied. "I mean we offer them something better than what they have." The Cathara Empire is built on a rigid caste system. The lower castes are enslaved, the middle castes are oppressed, and only the upper castes benefit. What if we offered the lower castes freedom? What if we offered the middle castes equality? What if we offered even the upper castes a chance to be part of something greater than conquest? Gorth's metal skin clanked as he shifted. "You want to negotiate with an invasion force?" "I want to divide an invasion force," Cross corrected. "The Cathara are strong because they are unified. But unity based on oppression is brittle. Apply the right pressure and it shatters." "And if your plan fails?" Zeth asked. "Then we fight." Cross replied, "But we fight with weapons they do not expect. We fight with cooperation instead of competition. We fight with adaptation instead of domination. We fight with the understanding that every species has value, including theirs." The plan that emerged from that session was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. Instead of massing their fleets for a traditional battle, the Allied forces would broadcast messages directly to the Cathara lower castes. They would demonstrate that cooperation was possible, that different species could work together as equals, and that the Cathara Empire's rigid hierarchy was not the only way to organize. A civilization. General Webb led the military component of the plan, but even her strategy was revolutionary. Human-designed weapons did not simply match Cathara firepower, they adapted during combat. Ships that learned from each encounter, weapons that evolved their targeting systems, and defensive screens that grew stronger under attack. The humans had created technology that got better under pressure, just like they did, but the real breakthrough came when the first Cathara vessels encountered the Allied fleet near the Tertius system. The Cathara commanders, expecting the same brutal warfare they had faced 10,000 years ago, found themselves confronted by something they had never seen. Enemies who offered surrender terms to the losers instead of demanding them. "This is Commander Tal 9 of the Cathara 7th Fleet," came the transmission. "You will submit to our authority or be destroyed." "This is Admiral Chun of the Terran Fleet," came the reply. "We offer you a different choice. Your lower castes can join our alliance as equals. Your middle castes can find opportunities they never dreamed of. Even your upper castes can discover that leadership through cooperation is more rewarding than leadership through fear." The response was immediate and predictable. The Cathara opened fire, their massive weapons tearing through space. But the Allied response was unlike anything they had prepared for. Human ships danced between the attacks, their movements unpredictable and adaptive. Rex vessels absorbed punishment that should have destroyed them, then struck back with coordinated precision. Vorthak energy weapons carved through Cathara shields with surgical accuracy, while Neth ships appeared and disappeared, striking from unexpected angles. But the real shock came when the Allied forces captured their first Cathara vessel instead of destroying it. The crew, mostly lower caste warriors who had been bred for nothing but combat, expected torture and death. Instead, they found themselves treated as prisoners of war, given medical care, and offered a choice. "We are not your enemies," Cross explained to the captured Cathara soldiers. "We are offering you something your empire never has, a chance to choose your own path." The effect was electric. Within hours, word had spread through the Cathara communication networks. The allies were not monsters to be feared, but potential liberators to be welcomed. Lower caste Cathara began sabotaging their own ships rather than fighting against forces that offered them freedom. Middle caste officers found themselves questioning orders that had never been questioned before. The tipping point came when an entire Cathara battle group, led by a middle-caste commander named Kex-5, defected en masse. They brought with them not just ships and weapons, but detailed intelligence about Cathara tactics and the location of their command centers. "Why?" Vex-9 asked Kex-5 during the debriefing. "Why abandon your own people?" "Because they were never my people," Kex-5 replied. "They were my masters. You offer me the chance to be a person instead of a tool. That is worth any price." The war that followed was unlike any conflict in galactic history. Instead of massive fleet engagements, it became a struggle for hearts and minds. Cathara defectors brought their knowledge to the Alliance, while Allied forces demonstrated through their actions that a different way was possible. The final battle took place not in space but in the Cathara home system, where the upper castes made their last stand. Even then, the humans offered terms: surrender and join the new galactic community, or face the combined might of species that had learned to fight together. The Cathara upper castes, bred for millennia to see cooperation as weakness, chose to fight. They died believing that their rigid hierarchy was the natural order of the universe, never understanding that they had been defeated not by superior force but by a superior idea. In the aftermath, as the galaxy rebuilt and restructured itself, the Deathworld Council found itself in an impossible position. Their authority had been based on fear and domination, principles that had been proven obsolete by the Cathara War. Species that had once cowered before them now looked to humanity for leadership. "We have become irrelevant," Vex-9 admitted during the final council session. "The galaxy no longer needs rulers who govern through strength alone." "Then perhaps," Cross suggested, "you should consider becoming something else." The transformation was not easy. Gorth had to learn that leadership meant inspiring others rather than intimidating them. Zeth had to discover that sharing knowledge was more powerful than hoarding it. Wraith 7 had to accept that transparency was more valuable than mystery. But slowly, painfully, the former council members adapted. They joined the new galactic cooperative not as rulers but as participants, bringing their unique skills and perspectives to benefit everyone. Years later, as Cross stood on the observation deck of New Terminus, the renamed and rebuilt station that now served as the cooperative's mobile headquarters, he reflected on the journey that had brought them here. The galaxy was not perfect, but it was better. Species that had been enemies were now partners. Worlds that had been considered uninhabitable were now thriving colonies. And at the center of it all, humanity had found its place not as conquerors, but as facilitators. "Do you ever regret it?" General Webb asked, joining him at the observation window. "The Council invited us to destroy us, and instead we destroyed them." Cross smiled. "We did not destroy them. We gave them the chance to become something better, just like they gave us the chance to prove what we could accomplish." Below them, the galaxy spun on, vast and full of possibilities. Somewhere out there, new species were taking their first steps into space. Somewhere else, old enemies were learning to become friends. And everywhere, the lesson humanity had taught was being passed on. That cooperation was stronger than domination, that adaptation was more powerful than force, and that the greatest strength of all was the willingness to help others find their own strength. The Deathworld Council had made their fatal error when they invited humanity to join them. They had expected to break the humans and instead had been transformed by them. And in the end, perhaps that was the greatest victory of all, not the defeat of enemies, but their conversion into allies, and the creation of a galaxy where strength was measured not by what you could destroy, but by what you could build together.